What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Murray's Model video. I'm your host, Kyle Murray, breaking down my NFL DFS model for Week 13 of the NFL season. I've been saying this pretty much every week the past month or so, but it really feels like time is flying on the NFL season. We have 4 or 5 weeks left to really capitalize on what's been a good season so far. So hopefully we can keep that momentum rolling into the final push of this season and really close out strong. We do have NBA right around the corner. If you guys aren't a part of the NBA product yet, you should get on over there because we have a pretty awesome content team, and it just got better. We're now adding a college basketball product into the NBA Platinum package, and so far the team has been crushing it over there. I don't really know much about college basketball myself. I don't typically get into the prospects or anything until they're making their way into the NBA, but luckily for me and for you guys, we have a handful of guys that are going to be able to capitalize on some of these awesome college basketball slates that DraftKings has been putting out. So if you're not a part of the NBA product, you should get over there for a multitude of reasons, but you just got another incentive, another reason to join the NBA squad over there, because now we are going to be including college basketball within the NBA product. And we also have a ton of awesome deals going on right now. You can use a handful of promo codes, but one that I would like to recommend is promo code KMER. You get 10% off of that, and you get me a little bit of a cred within the higher ups at the company here. But you can use all other promo codes like FTN Nation as well to get yourself 10% off. So keep that in mind. Hop on over there. But until then, we still have a month plus left to get some nice wins here in the NFL season. So we're coming off of a pretty weird week where we had the Thursday Thanksgiving slate, which ended up being a 2-game slate after it was scheduled to be a 3-game slate due to a COVID cancellation. So it kind of feels like I'm recording this on Thursday, and the final game of Week 12 just ended yesterday, Wednesday, with the Steelers and Ravens finally getting that game played and underway and completed, thankfully. So that week is finally over. So we're now on to Week 13 officially. So it's been kind of weird. Like it feels like that normal process that routine that we've kind of developed was put on hold a little bit and also delayed and kind of lengthened through the weird week with the holiday, and then with the weird COVID game in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, which was definitely strange, but it was cool. So on to this week. I'm pretty pumped about it. I do think it's a pretty solid week, a pretty solid slate here. We got a handful of pretty awesome games. We have, looking at it here, I think we have 4 games over the 50-point total. 1, 2, 3, 4 games. So 4 games over that 50 implied total. Actually, it's only 3. Sorry, I misread this one. So 3 games over that 50 implied team total. But we have a handful of other good spots that we can target here. So here's the stack rater right in front of you guys here. We open up with Minnesota, looking at like a 31-point team total from Vegas. Implied 21 for Jacksonville on the other side, which is pretty impressive in my opinion. So that gives us a game total of 52, which is pretty hefty. So no surprise to see Minnesota kind of make their way to the top of the list here. Have some concerns with Dalvin Cook, I suppose. He left the game early a bit last week, ended up returning, but Mike Zimmer did come out and say that they were a little bit worried about how much of a beating he's been taking lately, and they're potentially, obviously this is just coach speak, so it's all rumor at this point. We'll find out on Sunday, but they were looking to potentially lighten his load a bit because of how much of a beating he's been taking, and obviously that makes sense to me, just considering the fact that they do need him for the long run. Like, he is a guy that they do plan to make the playoffs. They plan to try to make a push, even at their own division still. They have some ground to catch up on, but they still have a chance at it. So they're going to need Dalvin Cook to do that. And in the spot against Jacksonville, wouldn't be surprised if this was a spot, but again, I don't know if I want to speculate on that. That gets you in trouble in DFS when you really try to speculate too much or over-speculate scenarios and situations like that one. So I'm going to try to stay away from pure speculation, because obviously on the forefront, Dalvin Cook's going to look like an amazing play here. Number 2, we have Seattle. Number 3, Tennessee. Tennessee's not typically a team that pops in terms of the stack rater, but in a spot against Cleveland where they have a nearly 30 implied team total from Vegas, and that game total is at 54, no surprise to really see them up there. Obviously, they're in the game with the highest total on the slate in terms of Vegas projections, so no real surprise to see them at 3. Seattle at number 2. I keep referencing this Kansas City week against the Jets, where a lot of people were off of them because they were worried about a blowout factor, and that's kind of what I feel like here. I haven't looked at ownership too much. I just finished running the final ownership for Thursday, so we're going to take a look at that once we get to the positional stuff. But I haven't really heard a whole lot of buzz around Seattle, and wouldn't be surprised if we see them potentially come in a little under owned because of just the fact that the Giants could just not really find a way to compete. We know how much Seattle loves to run the ball when they really can. Like, we even saw it kind of creep back into their wheelhouse Monday night when they were really kind of looking like a run first team again, and we don't really like that. We obviously saw the Pete Carroll quote coming out and saying, hey, like, we don't want to have to rely on Russ to throw 40, 50 times. Like, we love to watch him do it because he's good at it, but in an ideal world, they want to throw the ball 30 times a game and really show that they have a dominant run game. So that's one thing to note. Not sure. Again, it's another scenario where you don't want to catch yourself falling into those traps because that'll get you burned a lot. But it is something that you should at least note and look for. Not necessarily something that you need to play on right now, but at least keep that in the back of your mind. Indy at number 4, no surprise there. In the really the stud matchup here against Houston. The defense just can't really stop anybody. Houston has lost their top corner, Bradley Roby. I assume him and Will Fuller are both going to be dearly missed by that Houston team, as they're both suspended for 6 games for a PED issue. Not sure if it's the same kind of deal or if it's the same PED or whatever, but they're both going to be out for 6 weeks. So that will run them through the end of the year and then into the beginning of next year. So Bradley Roby being out for this defense is pretty huge. He's been very good this year, and this defense has been very bad. Like, they've been relying on Bradley Roby to really give them some kind of hope in their secondary. And without him, they don't really have a whole lot. They still have J.J. Watt, who's been playing okay this year, but it's a tough defense. And I don't know. We're going to have to look at kind of where we would want to stack Indy if we decide to do so. And then obviously we'll have to monitor some Jonathan Taylor news, as he was out last week due to COVID. The COVID reserve list. Not sure if he actually had it or not, or if he was just a contact tracing issue, but it's at least something to monitor. Obviously, we had a pretty big game from Naheem. Well, not big, but a solid game from Naheem Hines, and then a pretty solid game from Jordan Wilkins even. And we could have had even bigger games if Jacoby Brissett didn't sneak in twice at the goal line. That must have been very frustrating, because it was for myself. So number 5, we have Miami. I do have Tua Tagovailoa projected out right now. He has practiced in a limited fashion over the past couple of days, but the reason I'm projecting him out still is because of the fact that Brian Flores came out and basically said, hey, we're not running him out there unless he's healthy. Unless he's perfectly fine to go, we're not going to even bother, because we know that we don't want to risk it because he's our franchise quarterback. And 2, we don't want to, we're totally fine with running Fitzpatrick out there. We've seen that he's capable. He was running the offense perfectly fine throughout the first 4 or 5 weeks. And so we don't really need to risk it with Tua. So I feel like they could really go towards the side of caution with Tua and just run Ryan Fitzpatrick out there. And personally, for their offense's sake, for fantasy purposes, I think this offense is much more exciting with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center. I don't think we quite got to see all that Tua could do. We saw a couple of really fluky games where they were scoring. They had 3 defensive touchdowns within the span of 2 games. Like, we saw a lot of weird games from Miami. So I don't know if we necessarily saw how the offense is going to run, but just based on what we did see, they're much more willing to throw with Ryan Fitzpatrick under center. We saw last week Fitzpatrick got upwards of 40 attempts, and Tua hasn't even touched 35 yet this year. So something to note. So for DFS purposes, I would much rather see Ryan Fitzpatrick under center here, and I would really like stacking them up in this spot against Cincy. I stacked them last week, and it wasn't amazing. Fitzpatrick only threw 1 touchdown, but it could have been worse. Fitzpatrick was way too cheap. Devontae Parker got there. Mike Gesicki got there. So really, you definitely could have gone worse in terms of stacking up that offense, but there were a lot of smash spots elsewhere. So it was kind of an opportunity cost type thing. As for the Raiders, if you have the guts to go back to the Raiders here, A, props to you, and B, they are in a really good spot. We saw that they were in a fantastic spot last week. I liked them a little bit last week. Didn't end up using them as a main stack, the Raiders anyway. I ended up using the Falcons as a main stack and brought it back with Darren Waller. But they were just brutal. I can't even count the amount of turnovers they had. I want to say it was at least 6, but it could have been more. It was just bad. It was very bad. Falcons defense ended up being the best defense of the week, and they didn't even score a touchdown. So, yeah, the Raiders were atrocious. They were pathetic and terrible, and that was in a good spot. And now they get another good spot against the Jets. So it's really a good spot if you're interested in this offense, which I don't blame you for being interested in this offense. We have Josh Jacobs, who's banged up, and I get that we've seen them willing to give the ball to Devontae Booker, but I feel like whenever a workhorse running back is out and replaced by a guy who's hasn't really shown that he's a workhorse yet, I'm never surprised to see that offense turn to a more pass-heavy approach. Whether it's just passing a little bit more, and they're still running, the majority of their plays. But I'm always going to lean towards the side of, hey, this team's probably going to throw a little bit more if their number one running back is out and they don't have like a super stud backup. Like, for example, like the Brown situation. I was never like, okay, they're probably going to throw a ton more with Kareem Hunt. They're fine with Kareem Hunt. Devontae Booker, I don't really feel that way. Sure, Booker's actually played decently this year, but still, I wouldn't be surprised to see this Raiders team throw a bit more. And if you have confidence in the Jets potentially keeping this game close or keeping up here, it could be an interesting little sneaky game stack. I mean, we already have Vegas at a 28 or nearly 28 team total, so obviously Vegas is kind of willing to bet on the Raiders once again. So I think I'm going to be willing to do so as well. You're not going to find them at much lower ownership than here. The only issue is, do I want to fully stack them, like include Derek Carr, or do I want to, just get little pieces, maybe Booker if he's the starter, maybe Darren Waller, maybe a receiver. Now, the issue with stacking up Derek Carr is I just don't know who I want to pair him with. Like, Nelson Aguilar appears to be the guy outside of Darren Waller, and I don't really feel all too great about that. I don't mind necessarily pairing Devontae Booker with Darren Waller and then throwing Carr in that stack. I don't hate that. I mean, Booker was the guy that caught passes pretty regularly in Denver. We haven't really seen him do it so far with the Raiders, but I wouldn't be surprised to see if that usage ticks up a bit. So it's definitely something I'm going to be kind of monitoring. So check back in my article come Saturday for what my final decision on these Raiders ends up being. But, man, I do think it's a good spot for him. I mean, you can't really get much better than the Jets. And still, Henry Ruggs, he had another big drop last week down by the goal line. I don't know if he would have got in, but he would have been inside the 3, and he dropped it again. So like, Henry Ruggs just continues to find himself in a spot where he can make a big play and just doesn't. Like, it's the last 2 times I was interested in rostering him, he dropped a touchdown, or last week he dropped a pass at the 2 or the 3 yard line, whatever it was. So maybe it's just Nelson Aguilar season, and that I never feel great about. And then another thing about the Raiders, or really any stack that like it can even be involved when you're talking about Miami and you're talking about Indy, is we'll get more so to this at the quarterback spot, but we still have a couple, I don't want to say a lot, but a couple of elite quarterbacks on the slate that are just in brutal matchups. So like in spots where you're like worried about the game script. So for example, Seattle, you're a little bit worried about the game script there. Maybe we see them run the ball more than they pass here. Green Bay, tough spot against Philly, whose defense, it has been pretty good all year. Maybe their secondary has taken a hit, so maybe that's a good spot for the Packers here. But then you have Kyler Murray in a spot against the Rams, just a brutal matchup. You have Atlanta in a brutal spot against the Saints. You have Houston in a brutal spot against Indy. So it's like all these elite quarterbacks, all these elite stacks that we typically like, they're in rather tough spots. So you have to either decide, okay, do I want to take a shot on a stack with a prolific offense in a tough matchup or in a tough spot or a bad potential game script, or do I want to look at a cheap stack in a good spot? So it's kind of a battle of that in my opinion this week. It really, like, we have the Raiders, we have Miami, we have Minnesota. Who else? There's another one. We have Chicago. Like, we have a few good spots where the team is overall pretty cheap. They overall aren't all that great, but they're in really good matchups, and we have a few of those across the board. So it does kind of come down to what you want to do, and I think both ways are viable, and we'll get to that a bit more when we get to the quarterback section. But we have the Rams coming at number 7. The Arizona defense they were really good to start the year. They've kind of slowed down a bit, but the thing about the Rams in this spot is Arizona's going to play fast. Like, they're going to do that. So it's typically going to be a spot where they could potentially keep up. Even though they play so slow, they might be forced to play a little bit faster because of Arizona. Same kind of deal for the Raiders. Like, you can see here, they're the 15th fastest team in the league, or on this slate, sorry, but they are going against the 8th fastest team on the slate. So it's going to speed them up a bit. Moving down to Green Bay here, they're actually the slowest team on the slate, but they're going to be sped up a bit more by Philly, who, now the issue here is, can Philly do anything to keep up to make Green Bay kind of, keep their foot on the pedal? And are you worried about that? Because, I mean, Monday night we kind of saw it. Like, Chicago didn't do anything until late to force them to keep their foot on the pedal, and we still saw Aaron Rodgers throw for 4 touchdowns, but we didn't really see ceiling games out of guys like Devontae Adams. Saw a bad game from Aaron Jones, like we saw the Robert Tonyan game. So it's a little bit more of that kind of situation here. But still, if Philly does keep them up, keep this game a little bit quicker, obviously a good spot for Green Bay if that game's going to be sped up a bit. And they have a nearly 28 implied team total. So I like Green Bay a lot. And Aaron Rodgers is cheap. He's 6,800 this week, so that feels pretty cheap. This New Orleans-Atlanta game, I was on this game in a pretty big way 2 or 3 weeks ago. They just played each other. That was when Taysom Hill was the free spot over at FanDuel when he's a tight end. I was on the Atlanta side bringing it back with Taysom Hill. It just kind of all made sense that way. And I liked Julio Jones. Julio Jones got hurt in the first quarter, so obviously that's not ideal. He ended up coming in and out of the game, but overall, he missed almost the entire third. No, I think he didn't play one single snap in the entire third quarter and missed most of the fourth quarter and came in when it was like 4th and 12. And he caught like a 15-yard pass because they needed to try to. They were just like, okay, Julio, if you got anything in the tank, get out there because we need a first down here. He goes out there and they throw it to him. They get a first down. And then he hobbled off the field again. Ended up missing the last week. So obviously, we're going to have to watch his injury news. But if he sits, we're just going to continue to see massive target shares from Calvin Ridley. We're going to see a big boost from Hayden Hurst. Todd Gurley will have to monitor as well. Like, that situation was a little bit weird, but like I don't expect this team to be able to run on New Orleans at all. New Orleans is so good against the run, which just leads to more pass attempts for Atlanta. So they're kind of like a dart throw for me, and I don't know if I'm going to stack up the New Orleans side. I like some of their pieces, but I don't really want to stack Taysom Hill because he's just not throwing the ball. He doesn't have a touchdown pass yet. He doesn't really. I mean, sure, he can get there on the ground, but now he's priced up a bit, so I don't know if I love it. Like, for him to really make this stack work here, you need him to throw the ball. I don't want to play Taysom Hill solo or naked. I don't want to do that. There's just so many good stacking options this week. So I just don't really want to do that at his price. If you wanted to play someone solo, yeah, you're probably not going to find another quarterback on the slate with a ton more rushing upside than him, especially when it comes down to just touchdown equity. But like I'm still not convinced that Alvin Kamara is just going to be completely left out of the offense just because Taysom Hill's quarterback. Like, we saw Latavius Murray get it done. Sure, it makes a lot of sense to say, okay, Kamara's probably not going to get 10, 11, 12 targets like he was when Drew Brees was there, but I just really find it hard to believe that they're just saying, okay, Alvin Kamara, sorry, you just don't work with Taysom Hill. I just don't really find that to be. I find it hard for that to be true. So maybe last week they were just in a spot where, okay, we don't really need. We're going against a team with literally no quarterbacks. Let's just feed Latavius a bit here, keep Kamara not safe but healthy. Reduce some of that wear and tear. So I'm not totally writing off Kamara, and he's very cheap this week, so we'll get to that later. But I'm overall not on New Orleans as a stack. I just don't like Taysom Hill as a quarterback or as a stacking component this week. Chicago, I do like, which is just gross to say. But again, if you're making a decision where you're saying, okay, do I want to go for one of these elite quarterbacks, elite offenses in a situation or a spot that's maybe not perfect, or do I want to look at a offense that's just in a great spot, but maybe that offense isn't necessarily elite? That's kind of what you're getting with Chicago. Sure, the offense isn't like fantastic, but they're in a fantastic matchup. And two, we're going to have David Montgomery chalk this week, so maybe you'll get a little bit of leverage here. Trubisky, while he did not look good on Monday night, he didn't look brutally terrible. And now I don't think he's any good, or at least I don't think we're going to see a lot from him in this offense. But I'm not concerned about like who I want to pair Trubisky with. Like, I know I want to pair him with Allen Robinson, and that's a great pairing. I love Allen Robinson this week, so why wouldn't I like Mitch Trubisky at 5,400? Like, he's so cheap this week, where you can play that stack, play those two, and then really get anything else that you want. Now, sure, I get it if you wanted to go for a guy like Rodgers or Kyler Murray or Russell Wilson. Sure, I get all of that. But if you are leaning towards that cheap stack in a good matchup, I don't mind Chicago. Trubisky's cheap. The rest of the stack is really cheap, especially if you wanted to kind of double stack Trubisky. Like, obviously, you're probably deciding between Mooney and Anthony Miller, and those guys are cheap as well. Or you could even go Trubisky, pair him with Montgomery because his pass game work has been very good, and then Allen Robinson as well. And that way, around that Montgomery chalk, you're getting a little bit unique because most people aren't going to be pairing David Montgomery with Mitchell Trubisky or with Allen Robinson. So it's kind of like what we did a couple weeks back with Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook. Like, if you faded Dalvin Cook and played Adam Thielen when he scored those 2 touchdowns, you were feeling fine. But also, if you played both of those guys, you're like, okay, cool, we're soaking up all this offense in a great matchup. Now you're doing that, but with a worse offense. So it's like if you think they're going to score 24 points here, you're probably fairly confident that a lot of that is going to go through Allen Robinson, go through David Montgomery. So you're soaking up an offense essentially with two players. And then if you wanted to throw Mitchell Trubisky in there because he's super cheap and correlates well with those two, it just makes a ton of sense, and it will make for super unique lineups around David Montgomery chalk, because I do think he's overall a pretty solid play. Cleveland, we saw Baker Mayfield in the Millie Maker winning lineup last week. So that just goes to show that this Browns offense, I guess, does have GPP winning upside. It also goes to show like they were just in a great spot in terms of James Robinson was on the other side of the game. He was an optimal play at the end of the day. Jarvis Landry, 30-plus point performance. So that stat kind of just made a lot of sense and then opened up everywhere else. But again, they're in a spot where they're projected to score 24 points by Vegas in a 54 implied game total environment. So I don't mind Cleveland here, but I think there are other like gross stacks. I think I would prefer Chicago. I would probably prefer Miami and Las Vegas. I would probably prefer Atlanta, but I don't mind one-offing plays from Cleveland at all. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a game environment where we're expecting scoring considering the game total, so don't mind it at all. The New York Giants against Seattle here. Obviously, we have to monitor the situation of Daniel Jones, who he got hurt. I think he hurt his hamstring, left the game, came back in, one play, and left again. Now, this is a pretty good spot. Like, Seattle's defense has struggled. They did look pretty solid, but they looked solid against Philadelphia, so I will take that with the smallest grains of salt. But still, like, I wouldn't hate this stack either, especially if Daniel Jones is there. But I don't know if I want to mess with a stack with a banged-up quarterback. I just don't really know if I like that. And plus, like, some of the upside for stacking Daniel Jones is, he has some sneaky rushing upside, and you have to at least be concerned about that if it's a hamstring injury. So I'm going to kind of run through the last few. Houston is one that is so low on the stack rater, but we have two massive chalk plays from the Houston Texans. Brandon Cooks, Jordan Akins, both going to probably lead their position in terms of popularity. Akins might be number 2, but he could easily push number 1 over Darren Waller. And that's something to talk about because I liked this stack a ton coming into it. But if they're going to be popular, like, am I really feeling like I'm fading a ton? I just don't. I think Brandon Cooks and Jordan Akins are really strong plays, so maybe stacking them up and making it a stack is going to be potentially unique if Deshaun Watson's going to be unique. And if a lot of people are going to avoid stacking this team, they're just going to play Cooks and Akins as one-offs. I'll have to figure that out as we go, and I'll make note of that in the article on Saturday. But like I said, coming into the week, I was like, okay, like even after the Fuller suspension was announced, I was like, okay, this is going to be a very interesting stack because they're a great offense in terms of fantasy production, and Deshaun Watson's amazing, and it's a tough matchup, so nobody's going to play him. But now with everybody playing them, like everybody's playing Brandon Cooks, everybody's playing Jordan Akins, so it's a little bit toughy. It's a little bit tougher, and we'll have to monitor or kind of at least make a decision based on that. Jets, maybe a one-off if I'm bringing it back with them. New England and the Chargers, will kind of loop these guys into two plays here. This game's total is very low. A little bit surprising, just considering the amount of points that the Chargers have been putting up and the amount of points that their defense has been allowing. They're actually running the most plays per game in the NFL right now, which is weird because they're not running at a fast pace. They're just running a lot of plays in general. So when you're talking about that, obviously it's something that I'm interested in here with the Chargers. They are an elite offense this year for fantasy purposes, and they're in a tough matchup. Like, it's the same thing as us targeting Deshaun Watson a few weeks ago against New England when he was in the Millie Maker winning lineup. So I like Los Angeles. Even though they're 20th in the stack rater, I'm going against the stack rater here. I like Los Angeles a pretty good amount, and I think you have a few options for the Patriots in terms of bringbacks. I was on James White last week. He scored twice. I don't mind him here in this spot. Now, sure, a lot of his production came from scoring, which I don't love, and it scares me a bit. I was hoping for him to have more work in the pass game, but it's kind of just a weird game in general where they didn't really throw a whole lot. I think Cam Newton was under 25 pass attempts again, so maybe if the Chargers score more, they'll be forced to throw more. The Patriots will be, and that'll lead to more targets for James White, more receptions, etc. So that is one thing I like. So again, this is another team that fits that mold. So we have Houston, the Chargers, we have Green Bay, we have Seattle, and then now we have to talk about Arizona. So that's 5 offenses that are truly like some of the 5 of the best offenses for fantasy purposes this year, and they're all in spots where either the matchups pretty gross or the game script could be, not necessarily in a pass favor or maybe a shootout type environment. So Arizona's the last one. They're playing the Rams. I think the Rams might have the best defense in the league right now. If not, they're for sure up there. They're definitely in the top 5. They are a very good defense. And Arizona has looked pretty bad. I targeted Kyler Murray. I played Kyler Murray last week and this past game against New England. Figured it could be the same spot. And I mentioned on the Sunday show, I was like, okay, if you're worried about the Kyler Murray injury, I get it, because that was the spot where he was like, you could tell he wasn't really running as much in that game 2 weeks ago because of the injury. And last week he didn't run at all either. We saw Kenyon Drake have 22 carries, which we just haven't really seen a whole lot this year. So that's still one thing to monitor, but it's another week of him potentially getting healthier. It's a division game. It's just a spot where this game could sneakily shoot out, and Arizona has found themselves in shootouts a ton this year, and that's because that they play at a fast pace, they score a lot of points, and their defense is just on the field a lot, so they're going to give up more points. It's really that simple. But let's look at his rushing attempts over the past 2 weeks. So last 2 weeks he had 10 rushing attempts total. Prior to that, he had surpassed 10 plus carries in each game for 4 straight games, and then week 5 he had 9. Week 4 and week 3 he had 5 and 6, and then no other game he's had lower than 8. So he's had 4 games under 8 carries, and 2 of them came over the past 2 weeks when he's been banged up with that shoulder injury. So it's something to at least be concerned about or follow the news for. But he practiced fully on Thursday, so I'm kind of just gonna assume he's gonna be at least healthier, maybe not healthy, but at least healthier. So I think the Kyler Murray stack's fairly interesting here. I get the matchup's not great, and there are other spots that I would like to take shots on over this, but like in my MME lineups, I'm for sure gonna have Arizona. But in terms of, let's just try ranking these good offenses in bad matchups. Number 1, I would say is, or maybe not bad matchups, I should specify more. Bad matchups or potentially bad game environments. Number 1, it's Green Bay for me. Number 2, it's Seattle. Like, these are the 2 teams that aren't necessarily in bad matchups. They're just in potentially bad game environments with either opponents that who knows if they can keep up with them, which is obviously not a great idea. But if they're going to score 28 points anyway, I'm confident that a lot of that production could potentially go towards the stack that we're looking for. So number 3, I would probably say is Houston. Number 4, I would take the Chargers, and then number 5, Arizona. So Arizona's 5, but still, they are interesting. They're going to be completely low owned, and we've already seen it a couple times this year where nobody plays Kyler, nobody plays Hopkins, and they go completely off. Like, they're always going to have massively high ceilings because of how good they are. So I'll always have interest in those guys. Let's move on to quarterbacks now. We're going to break this down in terms of the pricing tiers. Obviously, we have 22 quarterbacks on the slate, so we have a few that I like. So I'm really trying to work on narrowing these down, and I'll have a more confirmed or more, I guess, set in stone tier come Saturday with my article. But at the top, and the player rater is Russell Wilson. It's no surprise here. Like, he still has a 28 implied team total. He's projected to score nearly 25 points for me. The matchup's phenomenal. The Giants aren't going to be able to stop Seattle. It's just about what Seattle's going to do on the offensive side of the ball. Chris Carson was back on the injury report, so that's at least something to note. Like, if he's out, maybe we potentially see more passing work, but I think Carson will probably be fine. I don't see why they would play him 1 week and then sit him the next if he's not hurt again. So I assume Carson's going to play, so it's probably a moot point, but I still like Wilson. Like, if you're looking to stack Wilson, if this team does score 28 points and Wilson accounts for 3 or 4 of them, you're going to do all right. You're going to do perfectly fine. So the only thing is they're expensive. So is it worth taking these quarterbacks and these stacks that are super expensive in potentially non-ideal spots? So like Kyler Murray, same boat. Deshaun Watson, same boat. But the main issue is Deshaun Watson. Like, I wasn't really too worried about the matchup here. I'm more so worried about the chalk. Like, it's pretty much chalk across the board for Houston. So, but when you see Kyler Murray's ownership at 2%, like how do your eyes not pop a bit? I know he's not projecting as a great point per dollar play, but he's still projecting as the third highest raw scorer on the slate for me. So it's hard to write off these guys here. This group of guys, it's hard to write any of them off, even though they're potentially not in like the most ideal spots. My favorite one of the bunch is probably Aaron Rodgers, even though he projects the worst. Like I feel like I'm just going against my model a ton this week, but I still think that Aaron Rodgers is in a really good spot here. The only reason the model is not going to necessarily love him is how slow the Packers play and how willing they are to run the ball. Like last week we saw like 40 rushing attempts, 17 from Aaron Jones. I think it was 18 from Jamal Williams, and then they just kind of split out the rest. But Aaron Rodgers at 6,800, I'm totally willing to take a shot here. The Philadelphia secondary looked completely abysmal against Seattle on Monday night, and then now Darius Slay's been added to the injury report, so something to monitor there. But yeah, I like Aaron Rodgers probably the most, even though he's rating out the lowest and projecting the worst. Like I still think he's a fine play. I guess I like him the most behind Russell Wilson, but the issue with comparing these two is when you're playing Russell Wilson, you then have to pair him with one of those receivers, and that's a headache. Like it's going to be split pretty much 50-50 between those two guys. If you're playing Aaron Rodgers, you're getting a $1,000 discount, and then you're playing a guy, probably pairing him with Devontae Adams, and then you're getting probably the best wide receiver on the slate in terms of just raw production and raw role, like his usage. So Aaron Rodgers makes just a ton of sense from that perspective. Herbert, I like a lot. I mean, nobody's going to play these guys because they had one bad week against the Bills. I get it. They were just terrible. Like Anthony Lynn should have been fired after the game because of how bad he coached that game. But this is still a phenomenal offense, and we still have a very condensed offense in terms of who we want to pair them with. Like Herbert, you can even make the case for pairing him with Eckler because Eckler had 14 targets or whatever it was. I know he had 11 catches. I think the number was 14, but it might have been a little bit lower, give or take a couple. But still, Justin Herbert, pair him with Keenan Allen, and then one of the ancillary pieces, Henry, Williams, or Eckler. I get like it's now a little bit more spread out, but still, like the reason I say it's condensed is because you want to pair him with Keenan Allen. Even though Keenan Allen had a bad week last week, you still want to pair him with him. He's still the guy there. So Watson I like, and Kyler Murray I like. So I know I'm not really giving a lot of answers right here, but these are all guys that are going to be very strong plays in terms of either they're going to provide a massive ceiling or they're under-owned, and none of these guys should be under-owned. Like they're all too good to be under-owned. So when they are under-owned, I think you want to play them. So again, this kind of brings me back to the discussion of, do we like the top-end quarterbacks in maybe not ideal game environments, or do we like the cheaper stacks? And it's going to come down to making the decisions throughout the rest of your lineup. Like obviously, if you go for these cheaper guys that we're going to talk about here in a minute, you can play pretty much whoever you want. After that, you can play the top-end running backs and receivers, and you're really kind of finding yourself doing that easily. So that's one thing, that's kind of the main decision that I'm trying to make here. And right now, I just can't get over how under-owned and overlooked these guys are going. So it's going to be kind of a decision of monitoring ownership here. But there are some really good cheap options here. I'll name my favorite ones. Kirk Cousins, I think he makes a ton of sense. Like this is a team that is the ideal target here this week. They're in a fantastic matchup. They're projected to score the most points on the slate by Vegas. And the reason why these guys aren't going to be overly popular is because the running back's going to be popular. And I think it makes perfect leverage to consider a Kirk Cousins stack here because, again, you can really identify where all that, well, not all, but most of the passing production is going to go if Kirk Cousins is like an optimal play. Like it's going to go to Thielen, it's going to go to Jefferson, maybe a little bit to Cook, maybe a little bit to the tight end, but overall, like, you're feeling pretty good that a lot of that's going to go to Jefferson and Thielen. So pairing Cousins with Thielen and Jefferson, just a really good stack, and it gives you a lot of leverage, and you're not really, like, how much of a ceiling are you really losing? I don't think it's a whole lot. Like in a spot where maybe we're buying the narrative that Minnesota is going to run a little bit less, or maybe they're going to maybe lean on Cook a little bit less and on the pass game more. Maybe Minnesota is in a little bit more of a shootout. Jacksonville keeps up. These are good spots for the Minnesota passing game. So I really like Kirk Cousins a lot. He's my favorite one out of these guys that aren't over 6.5K. Taysom Hill, I already mentioned. I'm just not playing him this week. The player rater isn't accurate in terms of comparing him to other guys here because Yeah, obviously he doesn't have quarterback stats, and a lot of this player rater is contributing to like stats and like matchup stuff. But still, I just don't like Taysom Hill. Like, I don't play. I don't plan on playing him at all, even though he projects well. The issue with playing him, even though he projects well, is he's not overly cheap. So the playing him solo doesn't make a ton of sense because you still need like here. Let's go to his game. Let's go to his game log real quick from last week. Because like last week, so he threw 16 times, didn't throw a touchdown, ran 10 times for 44 yards and scored twice. Like that is where all of his production is coming. If he puts up that game log, you're not winning anything because his raw 18 points doesn't matter because he's not cheap enough for that to matter. And then you're pretty much forfeiting some correlation throughout your lineup. Now let's talk about the Atlanta game where he threw 23 times, completed 18% of his passes, which is a very high number. So who knows if we might be able to rely on that number for Taysom in terms of the future. Like who knows how good he actually is. Threw for 233, had 3 long plays, and then 10 carries, 49 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So now when you look at that, sure, if he puts up that number, you're probably feeling all right. But then, like, are you super comfortable with, like, correlating him with Michael Thomas? Like, how happy are you with Michael Thomas? Like, you're going to need massive pass game production from Taysom Hill as well. And I just don't know if you can really count on a ceiling there for him. Like, sure, he's going to probably carry the ball 10 times again. Probably going to score a rushing touchdown again. But if he's not throwing for 250, you're just not getting a good correlation with him. So I just don't love it. Like I would rather take my shot at correlating with other quarterbacks in terms of just getting better receivers paired with my quarterback. And I don't mind the Taysom Hill and Michael Thomas pairing here, but if the Atlanta game was like his ceiling, I just don't know if I want to bank on that again because now you have a higher price. And the matchup's phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but if I was going to play a Saint, why wouldn't I just rather play Michael Thomas? I'd rather just play Thomas straight up than pair him with Taysom Hill. So that's just the way I feel about the Saints. And I do like Thomas a pretty good amount. Ryan Tannehill, I like him as well. Obviously, he's in the highest implied game total on the slate, 54 game total by Vegas. So I like Tannehill a pretty good amount. You're not really falling short of looking for talented weapons. Like A.J. Brown has been one of the best receivers in the league so far this year. Corey Davis has really looked good. Then you can even talk about pairing him with Jonnu Smith. And then this week they're talking about getting Henry involved more in the passing game. I mean, shoot, if we see Derrick Henry get involved in the passing game, he might really turn into the best running back in fantasy football. So that's something to at least monitor. Obviously, more coach speak. Don't know if we want to keep falling into that trap. But still, I like Tannehill. I like pairing him with some of these receivers here. Ryan Fitzpatrick, I like him a lot. Obviously, we're going to have to talk about if he's going to be starting or not. But if he does start, I like him a pretty good amount. And I love pairing him with Devontae Parker. I think I prefer Kirk Cousins over Fitzpatrick, and I probably think that Tannehill is the safer option, but Fitzpatrick has a massive ceiling. He has a massive ceiling in this spot. The matchup's phenomenal. We're going to talk about some other Miami guys as we kind of move on through position stuff, but he's someone that for sure makes a ton of sense. Phillip Rivers makes some sense. We've not only seen a lot of his receivers breaking out recently. Michael Pittman, we saw T.Y. Hilton score last week for the first time in 10 years. But now they have a really good matchup against Houston in a division game. So I do kind of like the Indiana team or Indianapolis team, but I don't know if I love playing Phillip Rivers. Like I think I would rather just take a shot on trying to get Pittman or T.Y. Hilton in their ceiling games, maybe one of the running backs. But I just don't love playing Phillip Rivers. I just don't know if he has a massive ceiling anymore. He definitely has negative rushing upside because he can't move. He literally can't move at all. They can't even have him QB sneak anymore. Every time they're in a QB sneaking situation, they bring in Jacoby Brissett. So, yeah, I just don't love Phillip Rivers. But I do like to take a shot on some of the Colts playmakers. Derek Carr, I mentioned in the stack section. I do like him a pretty good amount if you're willing to kind of hope on a bounce back here. Jared Goff does make some sense here. Like I mentioned, this could be a sneaky shootout game, and he's cheap. He's $5,800. I think it's probably one of the cheaper price tags he's had all year. He's been a guy that's been priced around 6.3, that range. So he's definitely priced down under 6K. Cam Newton, I probably won't play this week. I guess I would understand it in some scenarios, but I just don't love it. Matt Ryan, 5,600 is just very cheap. And if we have no Julio Jones, it's kind of a two-sided sword here with no Julio Jones because it's very evident that this offense just isn't as good. with Julio Jones sidelined, but when you take Julio off the field, every target is going to Calvin Ridley. He's being targeted so frequently. So when you're talking about that, like, okay, Matt Ryan, pair him with Calvin Ridley, pair him with Hayden Hurst, call it a day. You got a pretty correlated stack right there. But how much of an upside type ceiling stack is it going to be? That's a decision for Matt Ryan. But I do really like that he's only $5,600. That's a very cheap price tag. Trubisky at $5,400. Obviously, you guys can see that he projects very well for me. You know, I'm going to have some Mitchell Trubisky this week. There's just no way around it. He just projects too well for me to not have at least some of him. And the match is phenomenal. I actually like this game a little bit. When you're talking about looking at guys to bring it back with, we'll get to more of the receiver situation, but Kenny Galladay potentially returning this week. Marvin Jones potentially out. Danny Amendola potentially out. So maybe we're going to have a pretty compacted usage type tree for this game. So it's something that I'm always interested in, because in games that shoot out, like say this game shoots out, say it's 35-30 or whatever the score is, 35-28. If that were to happen, how much of the production is going to go to a bunch of random people? Like, it's probably not a ton. Like, a lot of production is going to go to Robinson. A lot of it's going to go to Montgomery. A lot of it's going to go to Galladay or whoever the top receiver for Detroit is, Hockenson. Like, you can really pick the names fairly easily in this game, and that's kind of the reason why maybe it's not the sexiest game, but I will always have interest in a stack if the tree or the I guess diversity that the offense can go through is smaller, just because if the game does go off, that's more when you're going to have those massive games, when you're going to have those, extremely GPP winning performances. And that's kind of what I feel like with Chicago here. Now, I don't know that they're an amazing offense that's going to go out, and I feel confident in them going out and scoring 35 points, but I know that they're going against a terrible defense, and I know that if they're going to be scoring a lot of that production is not going to be spread out. Like, I don't really see a ton of guys with a high likelihood of scoring a touchdown. Now, sure, Miller, Mooney, those guys have like small chances of having big games, but mainly it's Montgomery and it's Allen Robinson. So like, it's very, very minute in terms of the guys that where the offense production is getting spread out to, and that's spots I like to target. So Baker Mayfield, don't mind. Carson Wentz, you'd probably have to pay me a lot of money to roster him. Sam Darnold, no thank you. Mike Glennon, projecting well, but Jesus, I don't know if I can play Mike Glennon. He is projecting decently well, but I won't be playing Mike Glennon, I don't think. Might be playing some of his receivers, but again, like, I'll probably just pass on the guy that's just not very good. Even though he's very cheap, I would rather just play Trubisky. So that's going to do it for the quarterbacks. Let's move on to running backs. We saw this situation last week where Dalvin Cook was massive chalk, didn't do anything. Got hurt in the middle of the game, doesn't help. But then we saw Derrick Henry score 3 touchdowns in the first half. We saw Nick Chubb have 115 and a touchdown. We saw James Robinson go off. So we're going to see guys, there's going to be weeks like that where the chalk doesn't do much and the guys around him do. Now, it's interesting to see that the public's like, all right, screw it, I'm going right back to it. We're going to leave Derrick Henry under-owned again. We're going to leave Nick Chubb under-owned again. We're going to leave guys that are, Aaron Jones under-owned again. So that is something that's interesting. Like, normally recency bias is kind of going to haunt people. And, I would have expected Derrick Henry to be much more popular than he is, and probably not more popular than Dalvin Cook, but at least more popular than he is. Now, maybe with all the quotes going on in the media, Dalvin Cook's ownership falls a bit. That's something to monitor. But, no surprise that he's popular, but I definitely think that I definitely thought Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry would be closer. So let's talk about these guys a little bit. In terms of the guys over 8K, there's only 2 of them, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry. I think they're both phenomenal plays. I mentioned it in the quarterback section where Mike Vrabel basically said, hey, let's try throwing the ball to Derrick Henry more in a press conference yesterday. If that happens, he's going to be a phenomenal play. Like, he already has an 8% target share on the year, which isn't great, but like, it's maybe not. How much are you really sacrificing between like Dalvin Cook? And obviously when you're comparing him to Nick Chubb. Now, the reason I bring that up is because this 9.2 price tag is fairly high. But the ownership is low, and now you have the narrative of him potentially having an increased role as well. So I think Derrick Henry is definitely a strong play here. He's in a game where he's a 54. The game has a 54 implied game total. He's a favorite in the game. That's obviously a good narrative for running backs. So I think Derrick Henry is a phenomenal play. I think he's a very strong play. Now, Dalvin Cook, I still think he's a strong play, even with all of these things circulating around him. Like, again, 31 implied team total. Favorite, according to Vegas. Phenomenal matchup. They're all great plays. He's 35% owned, but you're not really getting a ton of salary discount. So, truly, I think these guys are very close. And the reason why I say I prefer Derrick Henry is because he's lower owned and because of the fact that if I was going to decide between these guys, who I feel more comfortable going and getting a receiver for, now sure, A.J. Brown's a phenomenal player and a phenomenal play this week, but I think I like stacking up Minnesota's passing game a little bit more. So now again, I'm going to have exposure to both of these guys a ton, and honestly, both of these offenses a ton. So can't really go wrong with either one. But I just really like Derrick Henry this week. I think he's a very interesting option, especially with him being, almost a third of the ownership that Dalvin Cook is. So I really like that a lot. Nick Chubb, I think, is a strong play, especially if he's only 5% owned. Like, again, this is still a game where, sure, they're not projected to win or they're the underdog, but they've shown that they're going to run the ball. They're going to run the ball early and often, and Nick Chubb is one of the most efficient runners in the entire NFL. He has the most 20-yard carries in the NFL this year, and he's missed a ton of games. So he is just a phenomenal runner, a great athlete, and he's very explosive. So he can get there in a spot where maybe you're looking at less carries, sure, but you're getting lower ownership because of it. Price tag's up a little bit, but I don't mind it. I think Nick Chubb's a very strong play. Was all over him last week, and I hope to get him in some of my lineups again. No thank you on Josh Jacobs. He's injured. They're not using him a ton anyway, so I'll just pass on it. If I'm going to play a guy that's 7,400 or 7, I'm going to easily play James Robinson. I would do many things to avoid playing Josh Jacobs over James Robinson. I was all over James Robinson last week. I had him as a core play. Sunday morning, I actually switched it. I made Nyheim Hines a core play just because he was a ton of value, but I still mentioned that I was going to have a ton of James Robinson. I wish I had more. He was just such a good play last week. He was 6,300 last week. That was a joke of a price. He's 7,300 this week, and I'm still fine with the price tag. So is the public. He's 19%. So it's not like you're sneaking this play past anybody. But again, one thing to note, James Robinson has usually been a guy that projects higher than he actually ends up coming in as, especially in smaller fields where maybe they just don't like the spot playing a Jags running back, but he has probably the best role of any running back on the slate. Like, look at his rushing percentage, 80%, which is the highest on the slate. Then he has 12% of the team's targets. So he has the highest opportunity share by a pretty good margin on this slate. So like James Robinson is just one of the better plays in terms of just banking on someone's role being significant. So I like James Robinson again here a ton. Aaron Jones is another great play in my opinion. I mean, Aaron Jones is the most frustrating guy in the world to roster because, he'll go out there and he'll bang out 7-yard carry after 7-yard carry, and they'll bring in Jamal Williams, and it'll be frustrating. But when he's on the field, he's going to get the ball. Like, he has a 51% look percentage. So that's a number that just basically says when he's on the field, they're looking at him by either targeting him or giving him the ball on the ground 51% of the time. So when he's on the field, he's getting the ball, which is a spot where maybe his snap percentage is lower, but it's a spot where Philadelphia is the underdog, making Aaron Jones and the Packers a favorite. They're projected to score 28 points by Vegas. He's 5% owned. Like, anytime Aaron Jones is 5% owned, I will have some. He's not, I don't want to say too cheap, but he's at a price point where you're like, he could easily be your second running back in, and you're feeling great about it. So I like Aaron Jones a ton. Eckler, I mean, I was all over Eckler last week, and I don't mind going back here. I just don't know if I like him more than some of these other guys. Like, would probably rather play James Robinson and Aaron Jones because the matchup is so brutal for Austin Eckler, but still, with how involved he is in the passing game, like, it's hard not to like him. Like, he had 11 catches last week. Let me actually look up the exact number of targets because I know it was 11 catches. 16 targets. 16. He came back from like a 3-month hiatus and got 16 targets. He's going to be heavily involved in the passing game, and so that's something that you obviously have to be interested in. He's just going to be touching the ball a ton. Alvin Kamara, it would be typically the standard just buy low play. Hope that the public is wrong on him. He's 6% owned. Alvin Kamara would never in a million years be 6% owned at 7K against the Falcons. It would just never happen. It would literally never happen in a million years. And I get it. The production hasn't been good, and the usage hasn't been good. But still, 11 carries last week, 13 carries the week before that against Atlanta. He scored against Atlanta in that ugly game where Taysom Hill also had 2 touchdowns. Like, it's really, you're just with him taking away the passing production. It's a brutal hit to his fantasy production. But still, at the price tag, like, let's say we're taking $1,000 away from Alvin Kamara. Would you play Alvin Kamara at 7K knowing that he's just not going to catch the ball? I think you still have interest here. Like, the matchup's good. The game environment should be good. And now all you're banking on is just not Taysom Hill. Maybe Taysom Hill doesn't score 2 rushing touchdowns for the first time in 2 weeks. Like, I don't think that's necessarily impossible. It's been really ugly if you've been rostering Kamara, and that's why you see a massive ownership cut and a massive price cut. But these are things that are kind of baked into the ownership and the price. Like, okay, you're rostering an Alvin Kamara who's been 9K at one point this year. You're rostering him at a 2K discount because of the fact that he's not being involved in the passing game and because he's a quarterback that is just messing with his entire flow. So, like, I get it. It's not ideal, but still, it's still interesting for me at 7K. Miles Sanders isn't projecting well here. I mean, Alexander Mattison, they're just pricing him up because Dalvin Cook got hurt. I guess this is a good job by DraftKings, but ignore him. Just going to skip over him. Miles Sanders, I like Miles Sanders a lot. I think he's a good player, but, man, he's dropping a ton of passes right now. I think he had 3 drops on Monday night, and this offense is just brutal, so I'll probably just pass on Miles Sanders. DeAndre Swift is the reason his projection is so low is because I don't know if he's going to play or not. So some of the simulations are being ran with him being projected out. I found it much easier to just run some projections with him out rather than restarting a ton. So that's what I've been doing this week because there's a handful of injuries and a handful of guys potentially returning from IR or not. So I've just decided to leave them in and then have some of the simulations account for them playing or not. So that's why the projection is low. If he were to play, his projection would go up. Don't know how much, but it would for sure go up at least a little bit. Even though the matchup is brutal, DeAndre Swift is going to be a guy that if he's playing at full capacity, 70-75% of the snaps. Like, that's just what we're going to see, in my opinion. I mean, I could be wrong, potentially with him coming off of the concussion. Now, there's one thing to note. Adrian Peterson came out and said that DeAndre Swift hasn't been the same since his concussion, which is just a very scary thing to hear, obviously, because it's a head injury, and you never want to hear that, especially since we've seen a handful of guys in the NFL, especially recently, have to stop playing because of concussion things. But a later report came out and said that he's been sick, like the flu or something, a non-COVID related illness. So that's why he's been, had the lack of energy. And he was actually released from the concussion protocol, and then he missed practice. So he practiced on Wednesday, missed practice on Thursday because of an illness. So obviously, I don't know why Adrian Peterson is necessarily saying that anyway, but if he's going to play, I assume he's going to play. Like, I just don't see why they would be limiting him if he's going to play and he's cleared the protocol. So I think he's going to play this weekend at 6,500. I already mentioned that I like some of the Bears as a stacking opportunity. DeAndre Swift might be the guy I'm bringing it back with. I like him a pretty good amount. Chris Carson, don't mind him. Like, if you are off of the Seattle passing game, I think you like Chris Carson a ton here. I think either way, you're trying to find exposure to this side, and Chris Carson's 6,300, so it's a very cheap way to get exposure to this offense. And like I said, if you're not looking at the Seattle passing game or maybe one of the receivers, I think Chris Carson makes a ton of sense. Jamal Williams, Boston Scott, Latavius Murray, all just priced up backups there. So another guy that's being projected lower because I don't know if he's necessarily going to play is Myles Gaskin. He's been practicing for like the past week and a half, so I don't know why he isn't returning, but they still haven't taken him off of IR. The report came out today saying that he could potentially be removed from the IR on Saturday, so he has to clear that, or he has to be removed from that by Saturday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, or else he can't play. If he plays here, I love him, and he is, I think, min price on FanDuel. Let me see. Let me confirm. He's not min price. Sorry, 5,500 on FanDuel. So like, if he plays, he's one of my favorite plays of the week. I think I would totally be willing to bet on him in terms of just being healthy, especially if we see Salvin Ahmed out again, or like, you can't count on Matt Breida. He's just nothing. He's nothing in that offense. We saw DeAndre Washington steal carries and snaps and touches, so Matt Breida is officially nothing in Miami until we see otherwise. He's nothing. So Myles Gaskin was one of the more heavily targeted running backs in the NFL when he was healthy, and he was playing with Ryan Fitzpatrick. Now he's getting a team that allows nearly 5 yards per carry in Cincinnati. So if Myles Gaskin plays, I will have a ton of interest, especially if the ownership stays down yet. I have him at 11% right now, which is very high, especially if you forget it hasn't even been removed from the IR yet. That's a very high number. Duke Johnson, I'm pretty sure David Johnson's expected to return this week. They took him off the IR, but he can still sit, so that's something to monitor. Jonathan Taylor, we have to monitor him as well. But even if he plays, I don't know how confident you can be in playing him, but he is very cheap at 5,700. So if we feel confident that he's going to be the guy there, he does make some sense. Kenyon Drake is projecting very poorly, and it's pretty much just because of the fact that the projections aren't accounting for a ton of targets, even though he has 9 over the past 2 weeks, which is very interesting. If he's going to continue that kind of trend, however, I'm just not confident that's going to be a reliable trend, so it's not really projecting him as a guy who's going to get that kind of work in the passing game, and the matchup's really bad. So I don't know if I love Kenyon Drake this week, even though he scored twice last week. Gallman would make some sense in terms of a run back because he's just a lot of that offensive scoring production. Like we saw, he's the guy in the goal line. He's the guy in the goal line. He's the guy at the red zone in the red zone. So he makes a lot of sense, but he's pricey. I would much rather eat the chalk with David Montgomery, who I think is a very strong play. I get it. It sucks that he's popular, but I've liked him a pretty good amount over the past month and a half because of this number right here, 12% target share over the year. And that number's gone up. After the first 2 weeks, it started to increase. So his recent involvement in the passing game is very high. That's why I like David Montgomery. If Jacob sits, I'll definitely have some Devontae Booker. I like Kareem Hunt in this spot at 5,400. The price is finally down in a spot where you can kind of take some of that risk that obviously he's not going to be on the field a ton, but he's still going to touch the ball. We've seen it pretty frequently over the course of the year. 3 guys are really touching the ball for the Browns offense now. It's the running backs, and it's some Jarvis Landry. That's pretty much it. So I don't mind that. David Johnson, don't hate it. Obviously, the projection is, again, accounting for him sometimes missing, so the simulations are a little bit off right now. But, David Johnson is someone to at least monitor. Again, they took him off the IR, so it'll be interesting to see if he plays or not. Hines, I like again, especially if Taylor sits. If Taylor sits, I don't mind this price tag at all. I think it's a very good play. Giovanni Bernard, don't know how I feel about it. Not the worst play in the world, but not a guy that I'm overly excited about. I would rather play White over Harris on DraftKings. Let's take a look at the usage report real quick, because I want to see where the snaps and stuff fell. Okay, so last week, James White played 38% of the snaps, and Damien Harris played 64%. He saw 46% of the team's carries. James White saw 17 and only 5% of the targets last week. Damien Harris didn't see a target. So, again, over the past 3 weeks, James White has 12 targets. Only saw 1 last week. I think that was a lot to do with just the way the game fell. And if they're going to use James White in the red zone, I think he's very interesting. But the reason why you would be playing James White is because it's a spot where you think potentially Chargers get ahead and the Patriots are forced to throw a little bit more. If that were to happen, I would think that James White would be fairly interesting. So with these 2 guys, I guess more so you're just building based on what scenario you think that they're going to fall into. Here you can see Frank Gore with a pretty solid projection here. And it's the guy that we got to talk about, because let's just head back to the usage report here. Don't know if we're going to like it. Don't know if we're going to love it, but we're going to check it out. I don't know why I looked at Las Vegas. Probably because he's playing Las Vegas. So, last week he played 58% of the snaps, 78% of the team's carries. Only one other guy on the team actually had a carry that is a qualified player. So, this data, I don't want to even call it a database, but this list of players only accounts for guys that have their average 10 snaps or more per game. So, if there was a oddball running back, I don't have him on here. So, that's where that number doesn't equal 100. But anyway, also saw 11% of the targets last week, has 5 targets over the last 3 weeks. And so basically, the reason why you're going to have some interest in a guy like Frank Gore here is because of the matchup and because he's getting all of the work on the ground. When we look at his raw carry number, he had 18 carries last week. If you're going to get a guy who's 4,400 in a good matchup to get 18 carries. You at least gotta like him a little bit, I guess. I mean, I don't know if it's a guy that I necessarily love, and I'm hoping that there's maybe somewhere else we can find some value down here, but he's definitely a guy that is at least viable this week. He's number 9 in the player rater, so he's viable. He makes some sense. All right, moving on to wide receiver. This is a pretty loaded position this week. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys over 7K. I think they're all pretty good plays, just to be frank about it. Devontae Adams, DK Metcalf, Keenan Allen, Hopkins, AJ Brown, Tyler Lockett, Thielen, Ridley, Michael Thomas. Like, how can you really make a case against any of those guys? I get the matchup for Ridley isn't phenomenal, but if Julio's out, like, you have to like Ridley. I love Adam Thielen this week. Lockett and Metcalf, obviously, you're probably going to be limiting these two guys to at least one per lineup, and probably you're only looking to like stack these top end guys like Adams, Metcalf, Hopkins, AJ Brown, Keenan Allen. These are probably guys that I'm only playing in stacks. As for the guys that I probably play solo, it would be Adam Thielen, Calvin Ridley, Michael Thomas. Like, those are the 3 guys that I would probably be looking to play outside of stacks. I'm probably not playing a ton of Calvin Ridley if Julio plays. Like the Julio situation, if he plays, I would probably have some interest in that stack at 6,600, but I don't know if I'd want to play them solo if they both play, if that makes sense. Like, if I'm playing Ridley outside of a stack, it's because Julio's out. Jefferson, I like him. Allen Robinson, I love Allen Robinson this week. Only 6,700. The number is just too low for a guy that commands so much of his team's targets and opportunity. So I like him a lot. Devontae Parker, the price is up, but if Fitzpatrick plays, I like him a lot again as well. Jarvis Landry is okay. The price is up to a point where I don't necessarily love it, but he's definitely fine here. I like Cooper Kupp in this spot. He would be my preferred run back option if stacking the Rams. Galladay, again, his numbers are going to be all out of whack because I'm really not sure if he's going to play, but I did run a couple simulations as if he were going to. So Galladay is someone to monitor, but if he plays, and especially if like we see Marvin Jones sit here, man, I just can't get over Kenny Galladay. 6K in a game that I like this week, and potentially with no Marvin Jones, so I would like him a lot. Welcome to Brandon Cooks Chalk Week. Again, the price just doesn't go up on him. He's been around this price tag all year. I get it. Like, the suspension was announced a few days or a couple days after the salaries were released, so I get it. But still, like, Cooks has also just earned like a little bit higher of a price tag, so I still think he's too cheap. So for that reason, I don't mind the chalk here because he is underpriced. Like, he's definitely $1,000 too cheap, so I get it. But still, like, it's still chalky Brandon Cooks in a tough matchup. And now he has to be the number 1 guy with no Will Fuller to take attention away. Like, there's some things to at least think about. But he's going to have an increased target share as well. So I don't mind Brandon Cooks, but I probably, I don't know. I think you can play him solo just because of the fact that he's so cheap. But I definitely prefer to play him with Watson. Moving on to Jacoby Myers. Don't really love Jacoby Myers. Not anymore, but like this week, I just don't know if I love the matchup. And plus, now we're seeing like Damiere Byrd get more involved. I think James White's going to get more involved in the passing game. So don't necessarily love it. DJ Chark, I do like a pretty good amount. Glennon looked like he could at least like manage a little bit, and so I don't mind Mike Glennon here, just to keep DJ Chark relevant. So I don't mind Chark at 5,400 in a great spot against Minnesota. Sterling Shepard, I think Sterling Shepard's a very strong play. He's been targeted heavily, but I probably don't want to play him if Colt McCoy is under center. So that's going to depend on if we see Daniel Jones able to go or not. But like, if Daniel Jones is playing hobbled a bit, like, I'm not really too worried about Sterling Shepard being affected by it, because the big reason why I would be worried about the injury for Daniel Jones is because his rushing upside would go down a bit. So maybe that could even be a good thing for Shepard. Nelson Aguilar, just don't. Can you ever play Nelson Aguilar at 5,200? I don't know. I don't feel great about it, but in a stack, I guess I don't mind it because he has been heavily involved. Let's take a look at their usage report real quick. So Nelson Aguilar is averaging 21% of the targets over the last 3 weeks. Saw 16% of the targets last week. Saw 6 targets. Renfro was at 9. Ruggs was at 5. So, yeah. I mean, still, like, I know Aguilar, we've actually seen him make some big plays this year, but still, I think Ruggs is the big play guy, but I mean Ruggs is only $700 cheaper than Aguilar, so it does make sense to probably bite the bullet and play Aguilar more if you were stacking. I'm probably not playing Aguilar solo a ton. Crowder, I talked about this a ton last week. Like, I went through it in depth in the Discord. I was like, if you're playing Jamison Crowder, you're doing it on narratives where you're saying, okay, the new play caller or Sam Darnold makes Jamison Crowder good. Otherwise, there's no trend to point towards saying Crowder's the guy there anymore. Like, let's just go check out their usage report. So when you're looking at it, last week in terms of snaps alone, Crowder is third in the pecking order in terms of receiver snaps. Denzel Mims and Perriman are blowing him out of the water. Both Mims and Perriman had 8 targets last week. Crowder had 5. Over the last 3 weeks, 16 for Mims, 12 for Perriman, and 8 for Crowder. So like, it's just very evident that it's now the Denzel Mims show there. I assume it's mostly because of the fact that they want to just see what he can do more. But also, like, when you see the difference in terms of pricing, like Mims is the second most popular, or not second most popular, second most expensive jet wide receiver, and that just shouldn't be the case. Like, he should be the most expensive receiver. Crowder should not be the most expensive wide receiver there anymore. Now, still, some of the numbers for Crowder are going to project better because of the fact that in terms of the season-long kind of sample, Crowder is still going to obviously have more targets on the year and all that good stuff. So, from just a purely trend-seeking state, I like Mims more, and I maybe even like Perriman more than Crowder. Again, like, it's still not too late to like see Crowder get more involved. Like, it was only one game with Darnold back, so we could still see Crowder being more involved in the offense. I don't mind taking a shot on Crowder here, but still, I think Mims is very clearly the guy that you want if you're looking for a Jets wide receiver. Corey Davis, I think he's fine. Probably a little bit more expensive than I would like, but I still think he's fine. Love Pittman this week. I think he's a very strong play, 4,900, very good price there. Obviously in a good spot. Tyler Boyd, man, I would love Tyler Boyd at this price if Joe Burrow was the quarterback, but no thank you with Brandon Allen. If he's going to be 9% owned, that is a very high number. I get that he's cheap. I get that he's almost $2,000 cheaper than we saw him just a month ago, just 3 weeks ago even. But still, that's a very high number. Let's see what he did last week with Brandon Allen. I forget. 6 targets, 3 catches for 15 yards. Like, it's just hard to really rely on any kind of production from this offense. So I guess I would like to at least see it. I know T. Higgins scored last week, so maybe you would feel more comfortable taking a shot on T. Higgins. I mean, he's cheaper, so I would rather just play T. Higgins if I was going to take a shot on a Cincy guy. Reynolds is somewhat interesting if you're stacking there, but I don't love him at this price. I think he's a little bit too expensive there. Bird is fine. Perriman's fine. Cole and LaVisca are interesting if Chark sits again, but I think Chark is going to be good to go. I think he's going to play. Let me double check. Questionable still, but he was limited on Thursday, so he could potentially get back this week. So now we look at these guys. Anthony Miller, Darnell Mooney are projecting decently for me. Let's take a look at their usage last week. I know Mooney and Miller, like, this is just a team that throws a lot, so it's gonna be easy for them to really get involved. Mooney had 9 targets, so I'm totally fine with going back to Mooney. I'm fine with going to Miller, but like, probably not playing those guys a ton unless I'm stacking them. Mooney I could see playing. I think Mooney's a very good play this week. He's cheap, he's low owned, in a great matchup, and it's a spot where we could potentially see, again, like, I think this game could be a sneaky shootout. So that is a spot that I like a little bit. Obviously, I would prefer Allen Robinson in this offense, but I don't mind Mooney there as well. All right. I think that does it for the wide receivers. N'Keal Harry, I probably don't mess around with. I would rather just take a shot on Damiere Byrd. All right, on to the tight ends. Darren Waller is going to be the most popular tight end of the week. No surprise, he's playing the Jets, and he's the top end tight end, and he's just too cheap. I don't get it. I don't get where the price difference is between like him and like a guy. Like, I get that Kelsey should be more expensive. Don't get me wrong, but like, Kelsey is gonna, if Kelsey were on the slate, he'd be like $1,500 more than Darren Waller, and that I don't quite get. Like, maybe like 800 more or like 1,000 more, but like, if he was gonna be like 12, 13, 1,500 more, I just think Waller is worthy of a more expensive price tag here. So therefore, I think he's worthy of the chalk. And obviously it's a great matchup in a spot that I like. Hawkinson would be just a phenomenal play if we see like both Galladay and Marvin Jones sit. Even if we just see like, so we have Jones, Galladay, and Amendola all questionable. So like if we see two of those guys sit, actually Amendola has been removed from the injury report, so he practiced in full on Thursday. So Amendola is gonna be fine. So if we see like both Jones and Galladay, or maybe even one of them, like that's where I think Hawkinson's a very strong play. Ingram I think is a very strong play. He had a massive game last week. I like him a lot. 4,900. I'm totally fine with that price tag. Hunter Henry had a pretty solid game last week. 4,800. Don't mind that price tag either. Goddard I think is the ideal run back if Ertz is out again. In terms of Green Bay stacks, like I think pairing Goddard with maybe even if you just do a skinny stack with Goddard and Aaron Jones, I think that's a strong correlation right there as well. Gesicki got that low Gesicki touchdown last week, thankfully, because he didn't really do a whole lot else. He had like a 33-yard catch down the sideline, which was pretty nice, but then he didn't really do much outside of that touchdown. But I like Gesicki here if Fitzpatrick plays. I think he's fine, but if he's going to touch that 10% mark, I just think there are other options that you can look for. Jonnu and Hurst, don't mind those guys in stacks. If Ertz plays, I don't mind taking a shot on him. Obviously, we're going to have to monitor him because he's a guy that we could potentially see them limit. But at this point, they need to win. So, like, if Ertz is going to play, I don't really believe in, like, this decoy stuff anymore. Maybe, like, limiting someone, like, truly just saying, okay, we're going to limit their snaps, just ease them back in. But even so, like, easing guys back in is making less and less sense because why risk the injury? Like, just wait until you know they're healthy because you know when they're healthy now because how good science is. Like, it's pretty obvious. Like, guys come back and they just play. We've seen it all year. McCaffrey, Julio, Eckler, Dalvin Cook. We've seen it over and over again where guys just come back and they play. Chris Carson last week, while he was limited a bit, still had like 15 touches and scored. So it's just becoming a pretty common thing and pretty obvious thing in my opinion, where I'm just going to take shots on guys that are coming back from injury if they're underpriced, because when guys return from long injuries, they're typically going to be priced down. And Ertz would be that guy for me, even though he's been awful this year. And maybe he got some freshness back in his legs. I don't know. Hooper, no thank you. Tunyon would make some sense here in Green Bay stack. Like you go Rodgers, Devontae, and then Tunyon. Jimmy Graham, he's grading out decently. He gets a lot of work in the red zone. But Cole Kmet is really sneaking up in terms of snaps. So it's really like Graham isn't doing anything now until they're in the red zone, which it's a two-sided sword again because you're like, okay, he's not going to do anything. But hey, when he is on the field, it's in the money zone. So when he could potentially find the end zone. So I don't mind that. Going to have to monitor the Minnesota situation. Irv Smith banged up again. Obviously, Kyle Rudolph wouldn't be the same play he was last week because Thielen's going to be back this week. But he could still be a decent play if Irv is out. Burton, I don't mind. Very good matchup for him here. And then Jordan Akins. Jordan Akins is such a good play this week. The only issue is the chalkiness. Like, he's been heavily targeted. I know he had a little bit of a down game last week, but that's going to happen with tight ends when your receivers are going for like 200 yards and a touchdown. It's just going to happen. So, yeah, he had 8% of the targets last week, 11% or 10% over the last 3 weeks, but 9 targets over the last 3 weeks. But now you're taking 23 targets. Taking 23 targets over the past 3 weeks out of the equation here. So obviously most of them are going to go to Cooks and probably Kiki QT, who I didn't even talk about in the wide receiver section. I like QT a lot. I think he's a phenomenal pivot off of Brandon Cooks. I love Kiki QT this week. But Jordan Akins, I think, is a strong play as well. The only difference between these guys is Akins is cheap and in a position where it's kind of an ugly position. Where's Kiki QT at? So he's actually not projecting all that well for me, which is strange. The matchup's not phenomenal, but he's just too cheap and underpriced. Like, I think Kiki QT could easily be like one like that clear-cut guy that we're just like, we look at on Monday and we're like, hey, how do we not get to QT more? Like, it's just obvious. Like, we got to Akins, we got to Brandon Cooks, so how do we not just go one step further and go to Kiki? So I do like him a pretty good amount, but Akins, the only issue I have with Akins is the popularity here. That's the reason why he's going to fall in the player rater a bit. But at this price tag, like, I ate some Kyle Rudolph chalk last week. I don't mind doing it here with Akins either. 2,900. You can really quickly find yourself getting some upside with a cheaper stack, like let's say a Viking stack or a Chicago stack, and then even putting Akins in that lineup, and then you just have everything to work with in terms of the rest of the slate. So that's pretty much it for the tight ends. I don't really love the tight end position. Like, obviously, I'm looking to get to Darren Waller if possible. Otherwise, I think stacking or using this tight end spot as a run back makes a lot of sense again. Or like what we've been talking about in the lineup review section is like use it for mini correlations. So say you have a lineup with Aaron Jones, like pairing him with Goddard makes some sense. Say you have Carson, pairing him with Ingram makes some sense. Say you have, I don't know, Nick Chubb, Jonnu Smith makes some sense. So you can do like little correlations with the tight end there, just to look for like a little bit added correlation in your lineup. So that's gonna do it. This has been a really long video. We're at 1:15 right now, so I apologize for the length of it, but again, I think this is a really spicy week. So hopefully we're gonna have all this continue to break it down as the week goes. Article will be live Saturday morning. This will be live Friday morning. So if you're watching this on Friday morning or afternoon, check out our live stream. I missed last week because I was sick, and they actually gave me a day off. I didn't think I would actually get a day off when I work at my house, but they gave me a day off last Friday. But I'll be back tonight if you're watching this on Friday with Pat and with Javi and with Derek. I think I might even be off this week. I don't know, but even if I'm off, they're gonna have a show there. But either way, Pat will be there, and I think Javi will be there for sure. And either me or Derek are gonna be on there. So check that out Friday. Saturday, my article will be up. Sunday morning, I will be on the live stream with Javi and David, and the exposures will be up, all that stuff. And again, check out the NBA product. We're 18 days away from it now. So check it out and get it while it is hot. We have a bunch of discounts going on right now. Perfect time to get on the NBA product because now we have a CBB, college basketball product as well. And we've had a guy basically from the FTN family finish in the top 5 of a contest in college basketball over the past 4 days. So our new content providers there have been killing it. So go check that out and come join the family. We're going to be having a fantastic NBA season, and we're going to be closing out this NFL season strong. So that'll do it for this week's episode. Until next time, good luck, everybody.